Perfect.
Can you hear us?
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah, we can hear you too. Thank you.
Man, I'm so excited. I'm David Heyman.
Hi, Alberto.
Alberto, nice to meet you. How are you? There's some other people here to introduce you to, including our Dean, Michelle Addington, who will be somewhere on your screen, I think. And there she's waving away.
Mucho gusto. You may not, I doubt you remember this, but I met you briefly, maybe 10 or 15 years ago at the GSD. But I hear about you all the time from José Castillo, who admires you and thinks of you as a mentor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. How are you? Fine?
I'm fine. I'm fine. We are now warm again. Our snow and ice have melted, and it looks like we're getting our water back.
Yeah, incredible phenomena, isn't it?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Okay, so what will be the format?
So I'm gonna give you just a very, very brief introduction. In a few minutes, we normally start right at 12:30, but given the fact that people are just coming in, maybe we'll wait 2 or 3 more minutes. Just a very brief format. You speak for as long as you'd like. Typically our speakers speak for 45 minutes to an hour, and then if you're willing to do questions and answers, we'll have questions and answers afterwards. Go an hour and a half at the longest, I think. Is that okay with you?
That's okay, no problem.
All right, perfect.
We have questions and answers, I suppose.
I have one urgent question. I have one urgent question. Is it Alberto Kalach or Kalach?
It's the same.
It's the same.
Kalach. We say
Kalach.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
I had a friend very knowledgeable in languages, and he says it was Kalach, but we use it here Kalach. So,
right.
As you wish.
That's exactly how I wish. So let's 12:32. I think we should probably go ahead and get started. We've got 60 people here in the Zoom room. That number keeps going up. We have people also on YouTube who are turning into our YouTube channel. So the first thing I want to do is welcome everybody back. I hope that you are thawed out. I can't think of a more exciting way to kind of restart the whole engine of the semester than our guest Alberto Kalach, the remarkable architect from Mexico City. I'm David Heyman. I'm co-chair with Clay Oden of the Lectures and Exhibitions Committee. Aside from introducing our speaker today, I want to remind everyone that we also this Wednesday have a really exciting lecture. Fleming Raffen from Près de Nature is coming. So it should be a really great week to restart. This is, of course, this last week was one of the weirdest weeks with regard to people coming from Mexico to Texas. And luckily today, I'm excited to say that we could flip that script from weirdness back to architecture, which I'm tremendously excited about. There's a couple of things I just make this short. I want to mention about Alberto Kalach, who got his undergraduate degree at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City, and then his graduate degree at Cornell. And then in 1981, founded the Taller de Arquitectura X, TAX, T-A-X, in Mexico City, initially with Daniel Alvarez, and now with Adriana León, and then numerous other collaborative partners. Two things. I mean, the first thing that I think is remarkable about their work is what and this is what an activist practice looks like. I mean, I think in America, we're in many ways presume the kind of passivity of the architect in the professional discourse, that the work comes to the architect as opposed to the architect driving the discourse around the work. And I think that Alberto's firm has just become known throughout the world for a kind of remarkable enlightened stance on that. And the second thing is, most architects, we learn about them, they have a small thing, and then we see that, and then a little bit bigger thing and a bigger thing. And maybe it wasn't me paying attention, but I don't think so. What I really love is the fact that for me, Alberto's firm arrived like fully formed. And this just happens with the remarkable library in Mexico City that is on most people's list of the 10 best public buildings in the world of the last decade. It's just a completely extraordinary building that is optimistic, technological, forward-looking. Just like it's, for me especially, it's very much reminds me of the kind of work of early James Sterling, taking all the kind of positive vibe of what might the modern world be and directing that at a cultural institution. But like the only other building I can think of like that in the last 15 years or so is the Ishigami building, the KAIT building, which just literally arrived, like it sprung forth from the brain of Zeus like a full-formed Athena, just a fully formed big building that was completely there, conceptually, technologically, at far vaster scale than we think of as most young architects. So with that in mind, those two things, it's kind of a remarkable introduction to an architect who suddenly arrived all around the world at once with a kind of activist practice. I'd like you to all please welcome Alberto Kalach. So now we're going to applaud silently for you. You won't hear it, Alberto, but it's happening out there. Thanks. I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Thank you. With me is Valentina, is one of our partners in the office, and she's here to help us with any technical events. Also, she prepared the presentation. The presentation is, we call it territories. And I think it's a very important topic that we've been working for more than 25 years, trying to fix some of the most demanding problems in our cities in Mexico. You know, in the 50s, 60s, there was extraordinary demographic growth with no control and with no response, not by architects, not by urbanists, not even by education. We didn't have even the capacity to educate, to give a good education to all the people that were born in our country in the last decades. So, and of course, the cities growth with out of control, with devastated territory. And of course, it is not something new. The devastation started since the pre-Hispanic cultures. They knocked down a lot of trees. They never replanted. There was not that concern that is now very important part of our agenda as citizens of the world, and of course as architects, because if architects are devoted to organize the space, we have to start by the territory. So we're going to show you some projects directed on that idea of the territory. Of course, our best tool and favorite tool to deal with the territory is Google Earth. Is one of the most amazing inventions of the modern times. We play a lot with Google Earth. We travel a lot with Google Earth, and we broke one barrier that when I was a student, I remember our teachers used to say that the most strong part was to start a project because you started with a blank piece of paper. And that isn't so anymore. We have a lot of information of any site. So whenever we start with a Google Earth image. So there's not this blank page idea. We have all the information on the board. So we're going to start with a project here in Yucatan Peninsula. You know very well the territory because you are not far away from there. You're our closest neighbors, Texas. And you can see immediately by the colors of the image, you know, you have the feeling of the territory. You can see, even though it's a very small image, you can see where are the mountain ranges, where are the deserts, where are some rivers, even though where the ocean is deeper, where there are tectonic faults in the planet. So we're going to approach to Yucatan Peninsula. How do we do that? Okay. Okay. And we're going to start with a little project somewhere around here. We were commissioned to do a restoration of an old hacienda from the beginning of the 19th century. And hey, where is that hacienda? Was it here? Vale. Okay. Well, anyhow, by doing that hacienda, we discovered that in the hacienda was abandoned for more or less 80 years, 60 years, and there were huge trees in the hacienda. But the rest of the landscape was devastated. There were no huge trees. There were like kind of abandoned agriculture areas. And all the inhabitants in the area, they thought that that landscape was a low forest, but not the high forest that we imagine that somehow happened there years ago. So by detecting those huge trees, we realized that if those huge trees were there, probably that was the image of the peninsula long time ago. So we did the research, and our observation was correct. It was a very powerful forest with huge trees, but very few were left. So we thought that that could very easily be restored. And we thought that even though there were, 80% of the peninsula is the big trees are gone, we can very easily recover them because the table water is not so deep. There is an enormous amount of water 10 meters below ground. And the conditions are given for the large jungle, for the large forest. So we started to design or to imagine first how to to encapsulate the urban areas, how to protect them in order not to spread out. Something that we have seen in many parts of Europe. The cities are perfectly well defined. The limits between city and forest, or city and the working fields, the agricultural fields are perfectly established. That doesn't happen in Mexico, but that's a very important thing to do if we want to have a more sano, a better world. We have to establish very strong limits to the urban development, but also strong limits to the agricultural areas. So by doing agriculture more efficient and cities more efficient, we can reconnect the existing forest. We can rebuild or replant the forest of vast areas. Of course, here we did it very fast with a color pencil, thousands and thousands of square meters in 20 minutes, but it's something that can be done, and it has to be done. So basically the territory is divided in three. The natural areas, the forest in this case, could be desert or could be other kind of landscape. The forest, these urban areas, and the agricultural areas. These three areas have to be very well defined. I know that there are countries that they have this planification very clear, but not Mexico, and it's a task that, and I know it's not happening in a good part of North America. We did agriculture in a very intensive way, and that's something that somehow has to change. The agriculture has to be interwoven with nature, with the existing nature. We have to recreate existing nature. If we move to the area of Mexico City, we can see here we can see in this part, this is Mexico City. This is Puebla is here. This is Jalapa. But all this was a continuous forest from ocean to ocean, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. Along this range of mountains, there was a continuous forest that now is completely gone. We destroyed completely the forest. We destroyed all the lakes. We extinguished all the lakes. There was a huge lake in Mexico City, now it's gone. In Toluca Valley, it was full of water beds and lakes. It was a very complex system of lakes. Everything is gone. All the forest is gone. And part of our task as architects, urbanists, planners, to recreate, to redo all this devastation that we have done for centuries and centuries. In fact, in the 18th century, when Alexander von Humboldt visited America, he spent a few years traveling around, and he pointed out the colonies were doing with intensive plantations. So instead of having agriculture for local consumption, the colonies did everything for global export. So they did intensively. They used the land in a very intensive way, and they devastated. They started the devastation, and that didn't stop until today. Today in Mexico, we have a very retrograde government, no care whatsoever for the land, for the territory, but that's a very urgent work that has to be done. So we, as the other image that we saw before, we did a series of intervention in these Google images. Here is an effort from here, the existing to the future vision, where all the forest is reconnected, all the agricultural areas are well-defined, and the urban areas are perfectly defined. The waterbeds, the water systems are recovered. It's an effort, a very important effort that has to be done in Mexico and in many parts of the world. Here, we can see the huge Mexico City with the recovery of the areas of lakes that can be still recovered. The reforestation of all the ranges of mountains. The same thing happens in the Toluca City, Toluca Valley, Puebla, Cuernavaca. It's an important task that architects have to get involved. If we do a zoom here, here is a zoom of the previous image. Here are the volcanoes at the east of the city, the cities around here. But here we see all the sprawling towns all over, and the deforestation. Not long ago, this forest was connected with this other forest, and now everything is devastated. Terrible devastation. So it's very important to reconnect the forest and to localize which are the areas, optimal areas for agriculture and the optimal areas for urbanization. Is a task that has to be done. We are not doing it, but we urge our authorities to do it. Here we see once again the remains of the forest along the water creeks, the agriculture all over, which is the first step towards urbanization, because agriculture gets inefficient, the people goes to the urban areas and they start to sprawl, the cities, the urban areas start to sprawl around. But here we see how can we create barriers, urban architectural buildings, definite barriers like medieval towns somehow to create a barrier between the urban area, the city, and the landscape, the forest, the natural landscape, and the agricultural areas, always surrounded by the forest and interconnected between them. Of course, how can we do this? The let's say the 90% of the construction, at least in Mexico, is housing. So many of these interventions can be accomplished with housing. If we do good housing, smart housing, and if the housing has this urban vision, we can do both. We can do urbanism and do housing at the same time. Here we see another example of the same. How can we can do with, of course, housing and many other functions that the city needs in order to reconnect all these natural parks. Here we see this sprawling, complete devastation, and the reconnection of the areas. Here we see with more detail, we designed a housing prototype, an additive housing prototype that could be built in like a last barrier between the urban area and the agricultural and natural areas. We thought in a scheme that could be built individually or collectively. Here we see in a closer vision, we decided to do a prototype, very small in its footprint. Is in this case is around 20 square meters, 26 square meters the footprint. And depending on the income of the family, they could have 2, 3, or 4 levels, or 5. And this prototype could, you know, with variations, could start creating this last barrier between city and forest, or city and agricultural fields. Is done about the plan is a system of hexagons interconnected. Is a grid of hexagons. We found that the hexagon is like in a bee, like the bees, the bee hive. The perimeter for the area that it creates is much more efficient than a square, or of course than a rectangle. So, and also from the seismic point of view, for earthquakes, is a much more efficient structure. Is how it interlocks one with the other. It creates a very strong structure that could could afford horizontal, could receive very horizontal strengths. We had the chance of building one prototype. This is the first prototype that we built. We did it for a housing exhibit where in an area they invited 25 different architects to do 25 different of prototypes. We thought that this one was, it works individually, but it works much better collectively. So we left the corners like that to be connected with the next. So it's a very, very simple structure where we have the living, kitchen, and dining in the first floor. Of course, all the materials are raw. And there is a staircase that goes up and around to connect the next floors. So it's a very simple structure, but very efficient. I think it's a fun house to live in, and each house on the top has a roof terrace. So these houses can be additive, can be added to create this last barrier between city and natural fields, natural forest. Here are the plants. It's a very, very simple house with the staircase spinning around. Then we're going to move to this other area. This is Tijuana, close to the border, close to San Diego City. It's a very arid zone and very badly developed, very badly designed. Everything is sprawls all over. And with these terrible housing complexes that they, whatever is left of the landscape is flattened, and they put concrete on top and very wide streets for parking, and these housing blocks which are absolutely terrible. So we were commissioned to work in this plot, and just by changing the concept of individual houses to collective houses, we changed dramatically the footprint on the land. Here, if you see in the existing, they occupy with streets and houses the complete area. Here we have a footprint of less than 10%. By changing, this little chip, instead of having this little chip in the mind of the developer and the mind of the user, instead of having each his own house with his car in front, we can have a vertical development of 2, 3, 4 story height, and you can completely change the landscape. You can create fantastic parks, and of course, because as you know, we need a lot of water to live. So instead of throwing the water to the sewerage and throw it away kilometers or miles away, we can reuse that water to create parks surrounding our housing developments. This exercise, we are trying to do it, and so there is a topography that starts to give us a clue how to intervene, how to not to do platforms. You put the bulldozer in, create stupid platforms, devast everything, and build on top concrete streets and concrete blocks. But it's important to work with the landscape, to read the landscape and to work with it. So here, the houses are responding to the topography. The streets are responding to the topography. We don't move the earth around. We work with the topographic lines of the site. And by piling up the houses, we have 90% of the site open for recreation, for parks. Here we went again with these hexagon patterns, but in this case we we did shift their apartments per floor, but still they are very efficient. And besides being efficient structurally and constructively, they are less monotonous. Other problem of social housing is the monotony. And to break that monotony, the configurations of the hexagon are very, very useful to break the monotonous lines. So we broke the monotony of the housing complex by using this pattern, but also by changing the heights of the units. There are buildings of 3-story highs, 4-story highs, 5-story highs. So that way we can break the monotony of the complex. We have only one street with few connections. Instead of having a grid of streets, we have one street where all the cars remain parked and walk to your unit. And by doing that, we have, more than 90% of the land free of construction to recreate nature again. There we have the numbers, and the buildings themselves are, very, very simple buildings. But by changing the height and using this hexagonal pattern, the monotony of the 2,000 units disappeared. Also, the idea of using maybe different colors of brick could be, here we can see one of the cul-de-sacs where you can enter to 3-4 different apartment buildings. That's a little bit the idea of the plan. The plan can be solved in a very easy manner with a nice living space, terraces, of course, and the vertical circulation is in the junction of the different apartments. Here we go back to Oaxaca town. I'm going to pass this very fast, but once again, you see here is Oaxaca city, many little towns around, and all these mountains that used to be a continuous forest now is gone and is urgent to be recovered, because also the other problem is that once that the forest is gone, the water doesn't infiltrate to the aquifer, because the trees, the forest, each tree is a retainer, is retaining the water when it rains and brings the water down into the aquifer. Once that the forest is gone, the water runs on the surface, creates a terrible erosion and runs out of the valley. So the aquifer is will not only lose the forest, but we lose the aquifer, which is our water reservoir. So here is what should be contention of the urban areas, contention of the agricultural fields, and the reconnection of the forest once again, and the sanitation of the rivers, of course, etc. Another example of housing as a solution for urban problems, we did this is just by the Rio Bravo, the Rio river that divides Mexico with Texas. We were commissioned to do this design. It never happened, but once again, how can we put together the housing units in order to liberate area for green spaces? In this case, we thought that it was a requirement that each house should have a car in front. But if we left the cars in the perimeter, it was a good way of doing only one street, all the houses attached, row housing, but the houses in the perimeter. As you know, the maximum area of any figure is the perimeter. In the center, very center, the area is 0. As you go out, the area increases, and the maximum area is in the perimeter. So by doing this, we can have a lot of, very intensive construction of housing, but in a way somehow living the center of the site untouched, like a natural area for all the units. Each unit is connected visually to this central area, green area. And once again, the units are, very simple. Another important issue is the width of the unit, which is the minimum. We have to go to the minimum of width for a unit. By doing that, we have less street per unit. We do much more efficient streets. So we can have more units sharing a street if we do very narrow units. So there are many good examples. Le Corbusier did it in Marseille. Previous to Le Corbusier, there are many examples of working row houses in England where they go from 3 meters to 360 width. And that's enough to have a very pleasant house and making much more efficient the urban space. It's as simple as this. If you have a house of 3 meters front, it needs 3 meters of street. If you give the house 6 meters, is 6 meters of street, you double. So if you put half front, half infrastructure, street, pipes, etc. And this is an example that we succeed in building it. Here, the streets were already there. So we changed the rule. So instead of having, this was existing, houses of 6 meters of front, 6.5, 7, we did houses of 3 meters front. By doing that, we were able to put more houses, narrower streets, deeper lots. And by doing this, we succeed in creating a more green environment. You will see in the next photos. So narrower lots, deeper lots, with a little garden in the back and a green street in the front. It's very important to have trees in the streets and trees in the back, the trees, each house, even though they are very tiny little houses, each house has two big trees, one in the front and one in the back. And that's a must. So even though the house is very, is 3.5 meters wide, it has several conditions which makes the house very livable, very enjoyable. First, have very generous heights, which is very important. Is in half levels. This, you know, there we did other units with one more floor, but always in middle levels. So everything connects one floor with the other. There is a continuity between the first floor with the second, with the third, with the fourth. That's very important. The cross ventilation is important. The greenery around is important for environmental issues, temperature, protection for the sun, of course, sun protection. And we thought we gave different conformations for the units. The developer didn't follow the plan. As you can see, they did, you know, flat roofs all over instead of doing the combination suggested, but sometimes change of windows, change of colors, they did some of that. And they did, of course, we be very emphatic on the trees in the street, which I think is the, even though it's a very low income housing, it became one of the most nice streets in the town, in Hermosillo. And here, I think this is a very, to us, it's a very successful street. It really changes the temperature of the area, of houses, and of the exteriors of the houses. And here we see with the possibility of using different materials in the facade, different conformations, different roof solutions to break the monotony of the complex. And the pergolas for cars with greenery, I think is important. And there was talking about the connection between the different levels. Even though it's a small house with small bedrooms, we have big doors that slide in order to connect during the day all the spaces of the house. The bedrooms with the living areas are connected during the day. And at night, you can slide the door and the connection with the little patios in the back is important too. With a tree, of course, and with green stuff there. And here we see the sliding doors for the bedrooms. So half of the bedroom opens up and connects with the rest of the house during the day. So even though it's a small house, during the day it's very open, the wind crosses by, and it's very pleasant unit, very pleasant low housing unit. And this is the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, we will be happy to try to answer. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Alberto, let me say thank you very much. I know there'll be questions. I know I have one. I know I'm guessing Michelle has a couple, and then between the two of us, we could probably question you to death. So I'm going to just mention now to our listeners, if you please go and turn your live videos back on, that'd be really, really great. And go to gallery view. That would be terrific. Maybe I'll start out with just a quick question, because, I mean, first of all, I want to say I was struck by the hexagons, because it reminded me that the last time I saw a kind of large scale use of hexagons in site planning was in Broadacre City, right, by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is very much a plan about taking the natural landscape and turning it into an agricultural landscape, right, a landscape of one kind of production. And I like very much the idea that a similar sensibility might be imagining a same set of kind of geometries associated with ideals, but transforming the landscape in another direction, which I really admire, just in many ways. But it got me thinking about this question of, you know, what you're describing either involves a political revolution of some sort, right? Or it involves a kind of marketplace revolution of some sort, right? That it requires that within the marketplace, the ideas are presented in such a way that are compelling enough that they move things forward. I mean, a project like that, to my mind, is this Green Line proposal for the Sahara, right? Where it's so graphically and so conceptually compelling that you can convince someone to do it. Or in, say, Portland, Oregon, which is the only city in the US which is doing what you're suggesting, right? They made a spectacular map that showed carbon footprint for people from the center and how. So what I'm wondering is how you imagine, because you're clearly intent on making a practice work. How do you move your ideas forward with your clients and with the government agencies that you come up against? Because let me leave the question there. That's, I'm sure, one that the students are working on, which is in their heads going, yeah, I know that you can propose these things, but how do you go about convincing a relatively conservative market about relatively radical ideas?
Well, as you can see, we haven't been very successful convincing no one. But I like that you mentioned Broadacre City, because now in the pandemic days, we see it as the future, right? It seems that the great Frank Lloyd Wright went out of fashion for half a century, but now it's in fashion now. Now that you can, very soon you could be flying with these flying objects that he drew, fantastic flying objects to move individually from one place to another and to work in the middle of the fields. That's becoming again a interesting possibility. Of course, Mexico is way behind for that. So I envision more of go back to the compact cities of the medieval times in order to leave the vast territory, to recover that territory. But yeah, authorities are not open enough to, and developers are very conservative. So many of these ideas are difficult to get through, even though the few ones that we have developed, the numbers are good for the developers, but they are lazy to change their way of thinking. Even the business is still a good business, even In Hermosillo, it was a much better business because the units that they were meant to be sold in 200,000 pesos, they ended selling them in 600,000 pesos, 3 times more per unit, because they reached a different market, because there was design involved and the houses were pleasant. So they spent the same and they sold them in 3 times more. But even though they did a great business, we haven't done much more with them because for them it's an effort to do differently. And developers are lazy. We are lazy to think. We are lazy to do things differently. But I'm sure that's something that is slowly changing. I hope.
I hope so too. It's a strange thing. I mean, it's absolutely true that if you look at cities in Europe, for example, they've expanded and retracted and expanded and retracted. And our thought that they necessarily have to continue expanding isn't actually borne out by historical precedent. I also agree with you that the real ripoff of broadacre cities that we're not actually getting to move around in our own personal helicopters, as Wright imagined, which I don't get. I mean, like, okay, I get maybe a hexagonal bathroom's got some issues, but what? No personal helicopters? That seems like a crime against humanity in every way. I know if there are questions, please, at this point in time, we can interject. Michelle, I'm going to recognize your raised hand and turn this over to you.
Yeah, I always have a question. And actually, this is one that was sort of a follow-up to David's question. One of the issues that we always deal with in this country is an inability to realize large visionary projects, anything at a large scale that crosses over so many different types of domains and jurisdictions that are all governed in a different kind of way. It's not just, it's one of these things that's really very, very difficult to do. And as I was listening to your presentation, and this ends up being somewhat specific, I was thinking about the National Mortgage Company, and I can't remember the name of it in Mexico, but I remember when Carlos Zedillo was in charge of that, and I think that was during President Nieto's time. And the whole idea of that National Mortgage Company was to actually sort of like create the funding mechanisms and the opportunities for larger scale innovation. I'm curious, was that something that actually worked? Was that something you were able to tap into? Is it something that's been unrealized? Is it gone now? But is that what you think of in terms of something that can help make these kinds of large scale projects feasible?
Well, it's very nice that you mentioned Carlos Zedillo, because it's incredible how one single person can change the complete panorama of the country. Carlos hired, he did more than 1,000 different, of course, not himself, but he hired more than 200 offices of architecture to explore housing possibilities. And he in fact built 200 different prototypes of housing to show the developers that with the same budget, you can do it differently. In fact, the 2 examples that we showed that were built were under the program of Carlos Zedillo. Unfortunately, once that the change of administration, they didn't keep Zedillo in their place, and they put another guy that with the old mentality of doing nothing. It's better doing nothing than to work, right? So we live in this very comfortably numb society, or like Pink Floyd used to say, comfortably numb.
I always love a Pink Floyd reference. You win me over with that. Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't seen Carlos in a while, so I was afraid that that's what had happened to that program.
Yeah, but now he's pushing, you know, with less power because he's not in the government anymore. But he's pushing the same schemes, and we are still working together. He's a great guy, and we need much more that kind of people.
Fernando, I see you have a welcome. Oh, what a nice background you've got
Yeah,
there. Dude, are you in,
background.
you're in the library right now?
I am, of course. Yes, I am in the library. Alberto,
Yes.
very nice to have you here at UT. I'm a big fan, as you can see from my background. I teach with this background many times, and the Vasconcelos Library is my favorite building of the 21st century so far. It's a really amazing building, and I've talked to David about it. I think I helped convince him to put it on his list also. I really admire your work. I'm a big fan of Ciudad Lacustre, your understanding of the broader issues of urbanization, on top of some amazing buildings that you have done in your career. But I wanted to ask you to elaborate a bit on your understanding of nature. When you started the lecture today, you're presenting about those settlements in Yucatan and the idea of enclosing the city. It still seemed very Cartesian, very European, Eurocentric, in the sense that there was a big separation between urban and nature. While to me, the big lesson, not so much of the Nahua on the mountains, but the Mayas in the lowlands, is that they live in nature. And they do not separate urban spaces, places where people live, from the forest. And the forest has always been managed. I mean, there's always people modifying the nature. And so it's like a garden. It's not really a forest. And when you propose to circle those settlements and define, I don't know, I think you default back on the Cartesian paradigm of separation between mind and nature, or mind and body. How do you think that? I mean, how do you see the possibility that people should dwell in the middle of not a forest, but a garden, which is what I hear.
Yeah, well, it's a very romantic idea to live in the forest, but definitely it has much more impact and is much more inefficient to spread out than to concentrate. If you think just in terms of roads, the roads that you have to build for a spread out in the forest, let's say that you are able to manage your own water and sewage because you can do a little well and have a pump water out of the soil. Let's say that you can have a solar energy to have electricity, but still you need connection and you need the roads. And the roads at the end consume more area than the housing. And that's a big concern. And the time moving around is of course, it works out in the case of the vision of Frank Lloyd Wright, the broadacre city, that you don't need even roads. You fly to see your neighbor, or you fly to the university. But without those flying devices, you need roads, and you need time to drive along those roads. And Texas is a good example of that sprawl out, and then the roads become highways and freeways, and to store, because people need to move around. So I still believe that this idea of the European towns, very compact, allows you to preserve out of the town the nature. And that's a big thing, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue, this kind of issue, especially since in the United States right now, so many developers are pushing the kind of transect idea of the city, and that as you move out, it's form-based zoning, right? You get, but the forms look like the city used to look, but then you measure carbon footprint against what seems to be greenest, and counterintuitively, it's of course the very worst thing you could do. You know, it's this profound problem. But it is in fact based on a kind of paradigm of city that we have developed in the 20th, at least 19th and 20th century. So I mean, I think the point that to a certain degree that Fernando's bringing up is maybe there might be other paradigms for how the city might be conceived. I think it's one of those kind of profoundly difficult questions and interesting to think about, like the transformation and evolution of the city in the next 100 years. I'm looking around the grid here of faces, and I'm wondering if there are any other questions out there that people have. Alberto, thank you so much. It's really, really pleasant. You may not know this, but our schools were shut down last week. No one's been talking about architecture for a whole week. All we've been talking literally beyond the fact that circulating hot water systems are a hell of a lot worse in cold weather than old piping systems. Because everyone that's got one seems to have an exploded one. And then the only thing that's exploded for the rest of the faculty is all of our course schedules have exploded entirely, and they're completely ruptured and in ruins. And this week, today and tomorrow, we're only kind of tentatively getting back on our feet and getting back to the serious business of architecture. But I wanted to thank you because I think this was a very serious lecture. I sort of appreciate you not showing the kind of big, flashier tower projects and sticking to this very hard kinds of questions about the architect's responsibility, weaving their way between these different forces from different forces of construction in society, but also asking that all architects take this kind of much larger kind of meta-vision, and not necessarily only a meta-vision of what's happening, but a meta-vision of what they think should happen, which I think is just a profoundly important lesson for our students and for our faculty and for some of our professional community who are all here. So those of us who are still here on video, if we could please thank Alberto very much for the time you spent with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope next time we will meet in Austin or here in Mexico in person. Thanks to Valentina is here and Andrea that helped us with the presentation and the connection with the university. Thank you very much.
It's got to be in person, and it's got to be soon. All right, thank you so much, Alberto. I really appreciate it.